Again, for most people, the Third Reich and the Holocaust are wholly German events, and England's only connection with the matter was to put an end to both enterprises by combining with America and using military force to end Hitler's dreams. It will come as a surprise to most people, I think, to learn that almost every aspect of the Nazi Party's plans relating to the conquest of Europe and the destruction of the Jews was set out in print and published decades before Hitler came to power. That it was an Englishman who came up with the most awful and destructive of Nazi Germany's aims is something most of us would rather forget. On the 9th of September 1855, a baby boy was born in the quiet little seaside town of Southsea, which is on the south coast of England. Britain was approaching the height of her imperial power in the world. Less than a year earlier, the charge of the Light Brigade had taken place during the Crimean War. The child's father was an admiral in the Royal Navy, and the prognosis was promising for the newborn baby, that he would take a traditional path to respectability and success in Victorian Britain. As it happens, this infant, who was named Housten Stewart Chamberlain, was destined to inspire both the most dreadful war and also the worst genocide the world had ever seen. This would in turn end by tarnishing forever the idea of scientific racism and causing those who thought that there might be something in the idea of inherited traits of intelligence and character among varying ethnicities to be viewed as dangerous right-wing fanatics, men and women who were either foolish and misguided or downright wicked. In this way, Chamberlain's writing still has a profound influence, even in the modern world. Housten Stewart Chamberlain was a sickly child whose mother died when he was just a year old. Because of this, he was raised by his grandmother and spent most of his childhood in France. His poor health led to his spending winters in the warmer climate of Italy and Spain. This lifestyle prevented the young boy from forming close friendships, and he became a solitary and thoughtful child. Although his father hoped that Chamberlain would embark upon a military career, or failing that, take up a post in the colonial service, his son had other ideas and ended up studying science at the University of Geneva. It was here that he became fascinated by the idea of scientific racism. Of course, this was not at that time a subject which was regarded with such distaste as it is now. Chamberlain became enamoured of all things German, learning the language well enough to write a massive academic book in German. His second marriage was to composer Richard Wagner's daughter. After working as a journalist and becoming well known for his views on race, Chamberlain settled in Austria, where he held a post at the University of Vienna, teaching philosophy. He was commissioned in 1896 to write a book explaining the supposed racial history of the world and the developments leading to the Industrial Revolution and the modern world. The publisher who solicited this book was Hugo Bruckmannoff of the Munich firm Bruckmann KAG. In 1899, Housten Stewart Chamberlain's great work was published. It was written in German and called Die Grundlagen des neunzehnten Jahrhunderts. Chamberlain's book, published a decade later in English as The Foundations of the 19th Century, was a massive undertaking and attempted to show the story of the rise of civilization in the way in which it was inextricably tied in with what he described as the Aryan race. He used the term Aryan interchangeably with Indo-European, and it essentially meant white Europeans from the north of the continent. Russians were excluded from the Aryan race because they had mingled too freely in the past with Asians. To use Chamberlain's own words, they had become a mongrel race. According to Chamberlain, the history of the world was a struggle between different races. His ideas of race were very precise and exceedingly detailed. He distinguished, for instance, the Jews from the Arabs, The Hittites he called Homo Syriacus and viewed as the original Semites. Then too there were the Bedouin Arabs, whom he termed Homo Arabicus. Unfortunately, these two races had bred a new species, which Chamberlain referred to as Homo Judaicus. These were the Jews, and although a mongrel race, they possessed certain traits which allowed them to thrive at the expense of other races. It was the Aryans who had been responsible for civilization in Europe, but they were held back by the influence of the Jews. One way in which the Jews cast a baleful spell on the Aryans was by means of Christianity. Although he stopped short of attacking Jesus himself, who was not in any case Jewish, as Chamberlain proved, at least to his own satisfaction, the religion he founded was a mystical hotspot which contained a lot of unhealthy Jewish ideas. In addition to what might be described as this spiritual malaise with which the Jews had infected Europe, there was a more concrete way in which they harmed Aryan culture, and that was by encouraging and financing wars in which Aryans fought against each other instead of their common enemy, the Jew. Chamberlain wrote, "And so, if such were the purpose of this chapter, we could trace the ebb and flow of Jewish influence to the present day, when all the wars of the 19th century are so peculiarly connected with Jewish financial operations. From Napoleon's Russian campaign and Nathan Rothschild's role as spectator at the Battle of Waterloo, to the consulting of the Bleichwoders on the German side and of Alphonse Rothschild on the French side at the peace transactions of the year 1871, and to the Commune, which was from the beginning looked upon by all intelligent people as a Jewish Napoleonic machination." It will probably not escape notice that the theme here, that the Rothschilds are at the back of wars in general and the affairs of Europe in particular, is still commonly found today in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories circulating on the internet. The main theme of the foundations of the 19th century was an apocalyptic vision of the battle between Aryan culture and Jewish cunning. The Aryans had produced everything worthwhile in science and art, while the Jews were capable only of mercantile manipulations and accumulating money. They planned secretly to destroy the Aryans by both promoting wars between them and also by miscegenation, otherwise known as breeding between different races. Chamberlain attributed the fall of the Roman Empire to the Jews and thought that it had in great part been accomplished by Jews encouraging Romans to marry into other and inferior races. He feared that 19th century Europe was about to go the same way. Almost every problem faced in Europe was either directly caused or greatly exacerbated by the Jews. Eventually, the Aryans would be compelled as a matter of survival to make a stand and reject Jewish influence and even physically rid themselves of the Jews living in their countries. The effects of Chamberlain's work in Germany was immense. Kaiser Wilhelm II was a huge fan of the foundations of the 19th century and used to read it to his children. He had copies sent to every library in Germany and also all army units. It was not only the Kaiser who took to the book, it quickly became a bestseller. With its clear message of the inherent superiority of German ideas and German blood to that of other nations, nothing could be more calculated to appeal to the ethno-nationalism which was enjoying such popularity in Europe at that time. Before Chamberlain's ideas became current, there was still a general belief that Jews could become Christians, that they could change their nature and be ordinary members of society like everybody else. Chamberlain was adamant that this was not and could never be the case. A Jew could no more become a member of the Aryan people than a black man could become white. It was entirely a matter of race and blood. Even before touching upon subsequent events in Germany, it is perhaps not difficult for the viewer rather, to anticipate and guess who might have seized eagerly upon these ideas. Housten Stewart Chamberlain's health declined in the early years of the 20th century until he was either confined to bed or needed a wheelchair to move about. At the outbreak of the war in 1914, he was living in Vienna and volunteered for the German army, although he was turned down on account of his age and infirmity. The victory of the British over Germany was a devastating shock, not only for the ageing expatriate ideologue, but also for a generation of young Germans and Austrians, one of whom was entranced by Chamberlain's vision of a life-or-death struggle between the Aryans and the Jews. It must be remembered that, unsurprisingly, in view of his admiration for Wagner and the fact that he had even married the composer's daughter, Chamberlain had a vision of some sort of Wagnerian set piece, Battle of Ragnarok, in which the forces of good, represented by the Teutonic Knights of Germany, fought against the crafty Jews, who were determined to bring down the Aryan civilization of Europe. These mystical ideas were combined in the foundations of the 19th century with other and more practical suggestions, which touched upon the real-world polity of Germany. It was Chamberlain's belief that democracy itself was a Jewish invention, and that the ideal government for an Aryan nation would be a dictatorship, one strong man with unlimited power ruling all the others. This was just what a young Austrian who felt much the same as Chamberlain about the Jews wanted to hear. Adolf Hitler was already violently anti-Semitic when he met Housten Stewart Chamberlain for the first time at Bayreuth in September 1923. For both men, the meeting was pivotal, as it was also to prove for the future of the Jews in Europe. Chamberlain was to be the first famous person publicly to endorse the newly formed Nazi Party. After the meeting, he wrote to Hitler saying that, "With one stroke you have transformed the state of my soul. That Germany in the hour of her greatest need brings forth a Hitler, that is proof of her vitality." On reading the fulsome praise heaped upon him in this letter, including Chamberlain's assurance that having met Hitler, he now felt able to die in peace, knowing that Germany would be in safe hands, Adolf Hitler rejoiced like a child. The fatal meeting between one man who promoted the idea of Jews as a distinct racial group and another who had the strength of character and determination to act upon what might in other circumstances have remained the ramblings of a misdirected and obsessive intellectual, was of course to have the most catastrophic consequences, not only for the Jews, but also for the millions of other people who became caught up in the Second World War. On Housten Stewart Chamberlain's 70th birthday, the Nazi newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, devoted 5 columns to praising him and described the foundations of the 19th century as the gospel of the National Socialist movement. Every aspect of this peculiar book was taken as being part of an essential blueprint for the future of Europe, as Hitler and his associates envisioned it. This meant that the Nazis enthusiastically adopted Chamberlain's perspective of the Jews as a race who could not change their nature simply by abandoning Judaism. This, of course, meant that even irreligious Jews of the professional class still belonged to an alien breed whose very presence harmed Germany and other European nations where they lived. It is no exaggeration to say that without their gospel in the form of Housten Chamberlain's book, Hitler and his National Socialists might very well have faded into the insignificance which engulfed so many other fringe parties in Weimar Germany.